Hey, we're back. So we just talked about how to load data from an API to Google Cloud Storage, both as a single Parquet file and as a series of partitioned Parquet files. That is, files separated by some parameter like the date. And that applies largely to entire data sets. So if you're loading an entire data set from a source, you might want to split it and store it. But what we didn't discuss is really like loading partial data sets or loading data sets that depend on some parameter. And that's frequently referred to as parameterized execution. We have a DAG, we have a pipeline, and the execution of that pipeline is dependent on some variable that we're supplying to the DAG. And so in Mage, there are a bunch of different types of variables. There are runtime variables, global variables. You can look at all of these in our documentation. Specifically today, we're going to talk about runtime variables and how those work. And in our specific example, we're going to use that taxi data set that we already loaded and show how you can create a different file for each day that your job is being run. Now, this is a kind of a trivialized example, but it will be useful, for when you call an API and you want to write data to a specific Parquet file by date. You're loading incremental payloads, maybe not entire data sets. So I think it's important to note for this example, you can just use the PyArrow example I mentioned because that will split data by that field. But parameterized execution is interesting for a few more reasons. But I think this is best illustrated by starting from our previous example, and that's the load to GCP example we just worked with. So if you right-click a pipeline in Mage, you can actually clone it quite easily. So this is an exact copy of our pipeline. You can see here we have all of the same resources. If I click into Edit Pipeline, we have the same blocks. Now, it's important to mention, blocks in Mage, right, they're shared across resources. So if you edit these blocks, you're going to be editing blocks across every pipeline that they exist in. And so when we edit blocks, there are a few things we need to do to make sure that we don't change those. And the block that we're going to be editing for this clone, we can actually remove the complex example. We're not going to need that. So we'll delete that block, which only deletes it from this project. It doesn't delete it entirely. And then this data exporter, what we're going to do here is we're going to, so if we edit this block, it'll be edited everywhere. So we're going to add a new block, a new data exporter with our updated code. I'm actually just going to copy this over. So we'll create a generic block. We'll call this export taxi to GCP parameter. So this is overwriting this block, doesn't change anything. We can then delete this safely. No, we have to remove the dependency first. So what we'll do is we'll remove that connection. We'll remove this connection, and then we can drop this, and then we can connect that there. So now that we have this, we're basically just created a new block. We don't have to worry about that. I guess while we're at it, we can rename this pipeline. So we'll rename this pipeline load to GCP parameterized. Save that setting. And so now we're ready to kind of play here. And what I want to call out is that you might have noticed every Mage block has this keyword arguments argument. And that contains a number of parameters. So any variable that you declare and pass into a pipeline is going to be stored in this keyword arguments argument. And we can access a few by default. So one is execution date. So I'm going to comment this out, and I'm going to show accessing that value. So so the time is by default now in execution date when the pipeline is executed. So if I do like keyword args.get execution date, running that will return our execution date. Oh, I forgot to print it out. Boom. So if you're running a pipeline and you wanted to say write to a location that was dependent on the execution date, you could do that using this variable. So in our example, say we were loading incremental data and we wanted to fetch it based on the date, we could supply this now parameter, which is a date time. So with date times in Python, you can also extract the individual components. So if we did like now.date, that would return, whoops, I think we need to do, yeah, that would return the actual date if we did now dot day, I don't think that's a method. Yep, we return the day, and then of course we can use a string strif time, string format time, to return customized components. So let's see if I can do this off the top of my head here. I think what we might want was like something like %year / %month small m / %day, and that might give us like a file path based on the year and the day. Perfect. So I'm recording this January 3rd. Happy New Year, everyone. So now that we have that parameter, if we were going to write incremental data, we can uncomment this. Oop. If we're going to write incremental data, what we could do is we could do like now f path equals that. So now we're returning that file path, and then we could drop that into our key, because that's defined by like, we'll make this an f string, so we can supply a variable. We'll do our now f path. It's usually good to print things before you just start writing them. So we could check to see what this does. Okay, so that looks like a pretty good path. Ideally, you know, we don't really need to name, so like this daily trips, we can do like daily trips. In your own pipeline, you might want to define some chunking logic, say like split this into certain rows or files. That makes it a bit more efficient for retrieval. But still, we could then, for each day, we could write to a different Parquet file, and we get nice partitioning and incremental processing. You know, so if I uncomment this here, and then I execute this with the upstream blocks, what this is going to do is similar to what we just did, right? It's going to extract that API data, it's going to transform it, clean it up a little bit, and then it's going to write to Google Cloud Storage, but with that in that nice little nested folder structure, right? 2024/1/03 daily trips. So each day you could then extract and use this parameter to write to a custom location. And so I wanted to call that out for a built-in parameterized execution, but there are also a number of custom ways to do this. So if you're triggering pipelines through an API in Mage, you can supply parameters that way. You can also define pipeline variables from the pipeline editor view itself here. So here you can see you can actually set these variables within the pipeline. So say you're extracting data and there's some downstream step that depends on an upstream result. You could fetch data from API, set a variable, then downstream reference that variable without having to pass data between blocks that way. And you can similarly, you can also see here some default, there's our execution date variable. But similarly, if we're defining a trigger, say, for this pipeline, if we're running on a schedule, we can add runtime variables this way. So number of ways to parameterize execution, right? Like you might parameterize based on a result that you receive. You can create that parameter based on the execution date. That's something that's built into Mage. Or you can get creative and store parameters elsewhere and then pull them in this way. So this is another way to write your data for data that's changing or locations that are dependent on a certain time or state. And it can be really useful. It's a useful pattern in data engineering. Yeah, so that's it with writing to GCS. Up next, we're going to talk about writing from GCS to BigQuery. The rest of this module doesn't depend on this example, but I thought it would be important to show you. So thanks, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.